Morning, everyone, and I want to welcome everybody to the Resiliency Through Sport and Recreation Conference. And I say that on behalf of the federal government. And it's certainly my pleasure to be here today to say a few words, talk about sports, and maybe tell you a little bit of a story. I'm talking to you from my home in Fort Providence. It's a beautiful, balmy minus 16 here, and it's supposed to warm up to -9. So it spring's on its way for sure. As I was introduced, my name is Michael McLeod, and I think most of you know I am from Fort Providence. I am the Member of Parliament. This is my third term. And before that, I was with the government of Northwest Territories as a cabinet minister for 12 years. And before that, I was the mayor of Fort Providence. Before that, I was the president of the Métis local here in Fort Providence. And before that, I was just a young kid trying to boss my mother around, which I really didn't get much success. So as you can see, I spent a good part of my life in politics. But what got me into politics, I believe, is my participation in sports. And I was an active young person in my youth, playing sports. I played fastball every summer. We had a league, and we were very competitive. We played volleyball and broomball in the winter, and soccer, and it was a difficult time because I grew up at a time where there wasn't any real facilities for us to use. There was no community hall. There was I shouldn't say that. There was a small community hall, but there was no arena and no gymnasium. And we didn't have very much for equipment. It's whatever we could scrounge up, and certainly no coaching, no professional coaches, and very little opportunity to travel. So we really had to get organized and really try to fundraise ourselves and really put our heads together to make it work. And some of that resulted in me attending meetings with our leaders and our councils in the community. So by the time I was 18 years old, I was a regular member sitting at the tribal council table talking about what young people are interested in, and that's activities for youth in the community. And at the same time, the elders were talking about land claims and things of that nature that they really were concerned about. And it put me in the middle of a bunch of people that were chiefs and leaders and elders, and they really encouraged me. And I spoke up quite a bit as a young person, and they really appreciated that I was not afraid to say what was on my mind. And of course, I was saying what everybody else my age was thinking. But they also talked to me about being a good listener, and they always encouraged me to listen carefully, because Aboriginal people have a tendency to talk, and through their talks they send messages, and there's stories that have real significant meaning that you have to listen carefully. And I was really fortunate because I really like listening to people's life story. Everybody has a different history. Some are very happy stories, filled with all kinds of things that make you laugh, and some are very tragic and heartbreaking. And most are a combination of many things, but they're always interesting to me. And I got to meet some very interesting people. And a few years ago, I told a story about one of the elders that I spent a lot of time with. I had a lot of respect for him, and he shared many interesting things with me. His name was Leo Norwegian. He was from Fort Simpson. He comes from a very large family. And I'll always remember how I first met him. We were flying from Wrigley to Fort Simpson. I hadn't really been on planes much, and I was sitting next to him, and he must have noticed how nervous I was. So he asked me if I was okay, and I told him that the plane looked pretty old, and the pilots looked very young. And he said, "Oh, we're not the ones flying the plane, so don't worry about it." And then he said, "I've been in three plane crashes and three planes that went down." So I said, "Boy, I don't know about sitting next to you." I said, "I don't know about being in the same plane with you. You must be bad luck." And he said, "No, no, don't worry." He said, "I crashed three times. I can't crash four times." And for some reason, that made me feel a little bit better. And then he said, "Well, but that's what I said after the first crash and the second crash and the third time too." So he had all kinds of stories that he shared with me over the years. But the one that was most, I guess, most relevant for today is the one he told me about when he was a young teenager. And I used to ask him a lot of questions about what it was like in the days when he was growing up. And he said there was not a lot of drum dances, but there was drum dances every so often and hand games every so often, and he used to love to go to them. And one there were in another community that made him even more excited to attend. He said, but when it was time to go to these events, he had to talk to his dad, and his dad would always say, if you have that much energy to go dancing all night and playing hand games, then you do something around here. It's obvious you didn't work hard enough. And so he'd make them stay home and cut wood and fill up the wood box. And then he would go to his dad again, and his dad would say, well, the water barrel's empty, so you better fill that up too. And so he'd do that. And then usually after the water barrel and the wood box is full, his dad would let him go, and he would run to the drum dance or the hand games. And if it was in the summertime, the hand games and drum dances were held outside. In the winter, it was held inside, usually in one of the chief's houses. And that's how it was when I was growing up also. But he remembered dancing late into the night, and he would dance, and it would make him feel so happy. He would feel so proud. And if it was hand games, he would try his hardest and really try to show off because he wanted to show and he wanted to be the best. And he also, he told me, he said, and maybe the girls will be watching, and one of them could be my wife one day. So the message I took from that story was that people have to be proud of their ancestry, and we need our traditional events to help us. As as Aboriginal people, our history has not always been a good one, and we experienced many things. We experienced loss of our lands. We lost a lot of our language. Our culture is eroding, and for our youth, this has left them in a situation where many are confused, some are lost, and some are experiencing some real despair. And it's up to all of us in this great country to change that. We need to make it better, and we can do that in many ways. We can do it through education. We can do it through music. We can do it through language revitalization. We can do it through on-the-land programs. And of course, we can do it through sport. And so many Northerners have been involved in sporting events and have been competing at various levels, be it community recreation, territorial, or national competitions. We've seen our athletes arrive at these larger centers very nervous and guarded. And yet, by the end of the week's competition, with a medal in their hand, and more likely not, they are pumped. They've made new friends, they have new memories, they have stories they can share when they go home, and they have a new confidence. I know personally, my wife and I, we really encourage our children to be active in sport, to travel with sport, and leave our small community so they can look back in from the outside. And now my daughter works for the Albert Sports Circle of the NWT, My son, who lives in Victoria, just ran a marathon last weekend, and he's turning 40. So they're still very active, and our youth and our coaches do such amazing work in our communities. They can't be thanked and recognized enough for the time and their efforts and commitment. And although excellence in sports is always the main driver, it has ripple effects that are experienced through hard work, through teamwork, and dedication to excellence, and the ability to bounce back after a loss. And that may be the truest and the most long-lasting measures of success for our young athletes. Supporting more active Aboriginal people in our communities that are fully engaged in sport, recreation, and physical activity is very important. I think we all know this, and to be both to the physical and mental well-being. And in closing, it's always important for everyone to remember their history and to try to pass on the stories we heard from our elders and how it was in the days when they grew up. And I always draw on the many things that I've learned in my years of travel. Many people that I talked to during those days are no longer around. My old friend from Fort Simpson, Leo, he lived a long life. And I was very fortunate to see him a few months before he passed. He told me he was not feeling well and that he wasn't feeling well for a while. But he also said he was not going to go down without a fight. And as things do go, he got sicker. And at one point he needed to be medevac down south, where he ended up passing away. And I went to his funeral. I drove to Fort Simpson, attended his funeral, and I smiled when Jim Antoine, who was doing the eulogy, talked about the medevac flight. Jim traveled with him. The nurse was asking him so many questions. They were asking him about his age, his name, his health, and et cetera, et cetera. And Jim said when the nurse asked Leo about his marital status and asked him if he was married or single, divorced, separated, or widowed, Leo smiled and he said, all of the above. And I don't know why Leo spent so much time sharing his stories with me, teasing me and joking with me. Maybe he was trying to pass on a message, or maybe he was just trying to be friendly. But at any rate, his stories have become my stories. And I'm forever grateful that he took the time to talk to me. And I'll always remember him as a proud person, a wise person, and a person who wanted to help his people. And that's what we should all be striving to do, to help our youth as coaches, as political leaders, as parents, as community members, to make sure our youth are also proud of their heritage. So, excuse me. Thank you for listening to my storytelling, and thank you for participating in this event.